died, he craved to go to the Christian heaven, not to the pagan heaven. They call it the golden dome of heaven with the gods. He wanted to go to Christian heaven. So the eyes that we see in Constantine's statue, large eyes looking upward, that is actually, originally, we find it all over the Near East, in ancient Near Eastern art, but it also is a symbol of an ecstatic moment. In other words, experiencing a spiritual moment with God. And I'm showing you this because I talk about big Roman things. These are just fragments from the Constantine the Great, statue of Constantine the Great. The hand itself is about 8 feet tall. So imagine what the whole statue was like. Gigantic statue. It was called a colossus. That's what colossal means.
Okay.
And this is his arch, about twice the size of Titus's arch. On it are inscribed both Latin inscriptions that are Roman pagan quotes and also Christian quotes. He made the Roman Senate compromise by taking Christian ideas and incorporating them into a Roman triumphal arch of an emperor, stating that I am the one that made the choice that we're going to be Christian from now on. And they had to fold because he had too much power. The Chinese Empire. Nothing related to Rome or Greece or Egypt, but there are empires all over the place. And this is probably the longest lasting empire ever. Look at the dates. 221 BC to 1912. Unbelievable. The first emperor of China is Qin Shi Huang. And if you watched the Mummy 3 movie, you know who that was. He almost looks like Jet Li. Not really. Actually, the last emperor of China looks more like Jet Li. But he was, the first thing I asked you was what is the manifestation of power? What are people thinking when they're that powerful to maintain their power, and what are they? They're paranoid. This guy was very paranoid.
Oh, yes.
What did he build to ensure that his paranoia wasn't threatened?
Great Wall.
The Great Wall of China. He initiated the building of the Wall of China in the 3rd century BCE, and it wasn't finished until the 17th century. It was until, I'll say, about 20 or 30 years ago, the only man-made structure on Earth that was visible from space. Now, of course, we have lots of different things that we can see from space. He, like the Egyptian pharaohs, when he died, wanted to ensure a good afterlife. So he had 6,000 life-size terracotta statues of soldiers and animals placed in his tomb to ensure that he'd be safe in the afterlife. Talk about paranoid. 6,000. Here's a close-up of some of the statues. And they're not just rubber stamped. They don't just put them in a mold and keep putting them out, but every one is an individualized portrait. Can you imagine how much money he spent on this? It might have even been more than the Egyptians spent on their pyramids, the pharaohs.
Competition.
Yeah. And the Chinese emperors continue to want to remain isolated, detached from the people. Most emperors, with the exception of people like Sesostris, want to remain isolated from their own people. And this is a prime example of isolation of the superior beings called emperors from the people, which are basically peasants. And it's the Forbidden City in Beijing, which until extremely recently, no one but the royal family was allowed in there, or the communist leadership. No one was allowed in. And it's almost like an entire city of its own, just like the Vatican is an entire city of its own. Now, this is a different kind of empire. I'm kind of jumping chronologically a little, and geographically a lot. And I'm going from gigantic China to little tiny Florence. But the Medici Empire is real. It's a financial and artistic empire. This is the city of Florence. It's in a valley surrounded by mountains. It happened to be at the right place at the right time. It had a river. It was at the crossroads between Asia and Europe and the middle of the Mediterranean. They became a very successful fabric industry center. And once you're successful with an industry, the money starts flowing, and then the money starts booming. And one of the first things that happens when you have a lot of money is that you start commissioning artwork to be made. Whether it's architecture, painting, sculpture, you start commissioning things. Because it starts to make your city look healthy, makes it famous, makes it celebrated, makes people want to go there and spend more money. What we see here is the famous Florence Cathedral known as the Duomo. That's the Duomo, Italian for dome. Right here is the Medici Chapel, built on the end of the Duomo, or right near the Duomo, in what is known as the Church of San Lorenzo. And over here is the City Hall of Florence, which, does that look like a city hall? Does that look like something else?
It's like a castle.
Looks like a castle, looks like a fortress. Florence was so full of fighting that whoever was in power in the city government had to defend themselves against the enemy party, so they had to live in a fortress. And eventually, when the Medici became the leaders of Florence, not officially politically, but in actuality, they also lived in it's called the Palazzo Vecchio, the ancient palace. Now, the Medici were so powerful, and they gained their power over, going the wrong way. They gained their power over a period of time so that it kept swelling. The treasury of the Medici kept swelling. They became so wealthy that they became the bankers of the Vatican. And eventually the bankers of all of Europe all put their money through the Medici. The Medici lent the money at interest. Just kept making money hand over fist. When someone is that powerful and they get power that quickly, they're going to have enemies that are jealous. The Medici had a family called the Pazzi family that was so jealous of them. And they were lucky, the Pazzi family, because there was someone else that was very jealous of Medici power and Medici wealth. And unfortunately, it happened to be the Pope. So he conspired with the Pazzi family to bring down the Medici empire. This chapel, called the Pazzi Chapel, was commissioned by the Pazzi family from a man named Brunelleschi, the man that built the Florence Dome. Because he was the premier architect in Florence, and they wanted that prestige like the Medici. So they conspired with the Pope to assassinate the two leaders at this time of the Medici dynasty, Giuliano de' Medici and his brother Lorenzo the Magnificent de' Medici. One day, actually not one day, a specific day, Easter Sunday, in 1478 roughly, the Medici family, along with many Florentines, were in the Florence Cathedral celebrating Mass. And suddenly, a bunch of people burst into the church, run up the main aisle of the nave. Some of them are dressed in monks' clothing. Some of them are dressed in everyday Florentine clothing. And they attacked the Medici family. Lorenzo, I guess, saw them more quickly than his brother Giuliano. And he started running to a side door to escape the assassination attempt. But they grabbed his brother Giuliano, they threw him down on the floor. And including monks, they stabbed him to death on the floor of the cathedral at Easter Mass. Lorenzo survived by getting stabbed in the neck and almost bleeding to death, but he got away and eventually became the leader of the Renaissance. He's the one that commissioned all these famous works that we see in the 15th century in Florence. And that's why he's called Lorenzo the Magnificent, because of his patronage of the arts. Now, this is the Medici Chapel that Brunelleschi built. And inside, you see that it looks simple, but it's very expensive. All this floor inlay, those are all separate kinds of different colored marbles. Very expensive. And the tomb on this side, on the left, is the tomb of Lorenzo de' Medici. And the tomb on the other side is the tomb of Giuliano de' Medici. Little glitch there, however. They're not Lorenzo and Giuliano. They're actually the nephew of Lorenzo and his grandson. And they're two of the stupidest, sleaziest, most corrupt Medici that ever lived. But they commissioned Michelangelo to do that, and he did it. Someone said, these portraits don't look like Lorenzo and Giuliano. And Michelangelo just shrugged his shoulders and said, well, in 1,000 years, who's going to know? So he created ideal images of the Medici to represent their power and their patronage of the arts. And of course, these are two of the most famous images of David created by artists Donatello and Michelangelo. And they like pizza because they're turtles too, you all know that, right?
Yeah.
Both commissioned by the Medici. Both to celebrate Florence and its art. Roman Catholic Papal Empire and its artistic legacy. Rome takes over from Florence when Lorenzo the Magnificent dies in 1492. So the Renaissance literally goes from Florence to Rome because it changes patronage. And the patron of the arts is Pope Julius II. He's the one that takes over. He wants to make Rome into the new Athens in its magnificence. That painting I showed you from 1846 of what we think Athens might have looked like, that's what Pope Julius wants to do for Rome. Because at the point in the beginning of the 16th century, Rome is a decrepit, polluted, crime-ridden pest hole. But it's always